Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Valerie Hope from the company Connect to Joy, and today is time to come alive. It's actually time to come alive every day, but particularly today, we have a wonderful opportunity every Tuesday morning to gather together and find a way to become even more conscious, more connected, and as a result, more creative in the world. And I'm so happy that every day that we have this conversation, I have a fantastic guest who will help us do just that. And today is no exception. But before I introduce my wonderful guest, I'd like for all of you, if you're online right now and you're watching this live, or you're here on Zoom watching this with us, please share this with your friends. Put it on your own social media platform, because it's an opportunity for you to engage your community in these conversations that matter. And if you're watching this on recording, please do the same. Share this with whomever you think needs this little boost for the day. As we begin our conversation, I always like to prepare our listening. So just take a moment, if you don't mind, to sit, if you're sitting or if you're standing, just to find yourself grounded. For some, you might find it more comfortable to close your eyes. Others, you may just want to unfocus your gaze slightly. Just take a couple of deep breaths. I want you to think of times where you felt sadness or perhaps disappointment, maybe even frustration or anger. And in those moments, who did you reach out to? Or what did you reach towards to help with the burden, to support you in your grief? Think of the qualities of the individuals in your life with whom you trust those very deep, important feelings. And send them some gratitude for having been there, for having listened, for having supported you. Take another deep breath. On the other side, I want you to think of times where you've been joyful, perhaps feeling playful, giddy, having fun. And think about who you wanted to share that fun with. The people that surrounded you and playing and giving you the experience of freedom and playfulness, joy. And what qualities and characteristics did they share? What makes somebody in your life qualified to carry you in the moments where you're feeling pain or when you're feeling joy? And then finally, think about how you show up for people in your life and what you can offer them in those moments. And send others and yourself some wonderful gratitude as well. All right, you may open your eyes, unfocus or refocus your gaze and rejoin us. I know that's, talking about joy and pain or grief, anger and sadness, those are not necessarily the most uplifting, not nearly always uplifting conversations that we could have, but I had a personal experience with our guest today that I think actually shows that it absolutely can be an uplifting experience. I had the fantastic, wonderful opportunity to meet Michele Kinder. Michele is is big news here in Dallas, Texas. I'll have you know, first of all, because she's a wonderful close friend of a friend, and I happened to see her speak at an event. And from the moment I heard you open your mouth, Michele, and heard you speak, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to go meet this woman. And what I really, really appreciated about it, first of all, I think we had like a 2-minute exchange. You were speaking at the Conscious Capitalism event here in Dallas, Texas. And I just so happened to be sitting next to one of your coworkers at the time, or former coworkers. And so all the stars were aligned for us to have this encounter. And we met, and shortly in meeting decided we need to get together for coffee or tea, which we did. And I also learned that we don't reschedule appointments with Michele Kinder. That just doesn't happen. Not because of any ego trip that you're on, but because you're just that kind of woman that's sometimes a little difficult to get on a calendar. And so I'm like, okay, I can't change anything. It so happened though that the night before we met, I broke up with my boyfriend. And it was very, very sad moment for me. But I knew that the next afternoon that I had a meeting with Michele Kinder that I could not cancel or postpone. And and I'm not saying this to build your ego in any way, but I was like, no, you know what? I'll pull it together. I'm strong, capable, got it going on. So we met, and I think upon the first 30 seconds of saying, hi, nice to see you again, and you asked me, so how are you? And I don't know, I couldn't even put my finger on it, but what it was that compelled me to say, you know, I just broke up with my boyfriend last night. I've been feeling sad most of the day. And you and I had just the most beautiful conversation just from the outset about that emotion. You know, clearly went through some of the detail behind it, but then also by the end of the conversation, and I think we were only together for maybe an hour and a half, maybe 2, I walked away from that conversation having had such a profound shift in honoring the relationship that I'd had, and then also understanding my own purpose and the joy that I feel like I'm the custodian of joy in my life because of some of the conversation that we had, the questions that you asked me, the space that you held for me. And I just thought that was so, I'm so grateful, first of all. So you're one of the people that I share gratitude with. So thank you so much. And that very vulnerable moment, but at the same time, we didn't know each other. So I just feel like these are the kind of conversations or the kind of encounters that we all need, our soul needs in our lifetime. And I just, first of all, just want to say thank you.
I had the same experience spending the time with you. It was a mutual joy exchange.
It really was. It really was. But I'm curious, we're just going to jump in right here. So first of all, I know you are an accomplished speaker and a writer. I've seen some of the wonderful articles you've written. You spent more than 20 years working for an organization that's so well regarded here in the Dallas area, the Momentous Institute, as the executive director. And since then, you've gone on to bigger things. So anything else you'd like to share about who you are and what you've brought to this world and the wonderful time that we've had you here?
Oh, yes. You know, first of all, I would tell you, I don't know if there are bigger things than Momentous Institute. That's an amazing chapter for me, and I still count myself as their #1 cheerleader. But I will say, in transitioning out of that role, I learned that total transformation and a completely different kind of joy is available to you, even if you love your life. That's been one of my lessons this year. So amazing, amazing place, amazing 20 years. And on the other side of it, a whole different kind of juiciness. So it's just, I feel so grateful for both chapters. And the only other things I would add is I think my #1 favorite job is mom, and have 2 daughters, Maya and Sophia, 17 and almost 13, and married to Patrick, and house full of rescue dogs. And my favorite place in the world to be is home with everyone here, not necessarily engaging even with each other, but just being close to them in our space is heaven.
So I'm curious about how you create that space of heaven, because I think that it was kind of like what you and I experienced in that brief moment in the little coffee shop. Is just this opportunity to be completely bare souls, but then also be a witness to the needs of another human. And it sounds like this is an environment that you create intentionally in your home. What do you do to create that kind of openness?
Oh, I think kind of recognizing and understanding that the world outside these four walls is challenging and sometimes confusing and sometimes demands things of us that sort of pulls us off center. And just deciding early on that I wanted our relationships and our home to be the soft place to fall for my husband, for me, for our girls, that we would never be an addition to the stress. We would be the place people come to exhale. And it's not that we're not. There are some times in our house where you'd be like, ooh, that sounds like yelling. Perfect, but it's intentional, and I think even in the face of some of that not perfectness, we've managed to create a container where all of us can refuel and reconnect our most authentic selves.
Wow. And what was it about having that kind of environment that's so important to you? I mean, it clearly makes sense to want that for our families, and it takes something to implement it. So I'm curious about what you and Patrick, what had the two of you decide that this is what you wanted to create in your family?
It's such a good question. I think one of the ways that crystallized for me is before I got married, while I was married, and before kids, and then all through my kids' younger years, I was a family therapist. And so I spent time in the room with families who were hurting, who were in crisis, who were suffering. And they taught me so much about resilience and, how to use distress to learn to move toward each other instead of away from each other. And they also served as cautionary tales for me. And so I spent all day learning about that and experiencing it in a very visceral, heartfelt way. And that kept me super awake to what I wanted for my own family and what it was going to take to have it.
Wow. And what's been the impact? I mean, this was so many years in the making of preparation, and then how has that gone?
In terms of our daughters, every parent in the world is like, you don't know because the jury's out until probably they're adults and have launched. But I will say both of our girls are so themselves and so unswayed by a lot of what pulls young people into spins. They just are who they are, and are pretty grounded, and they're funny and smart, and they feel things deeply, and they care deeply. I don't know. They're two of my three favorite people, and I think a lot of it has to do with that they feel really clear in their relationship to their dad, and in their relationship to me, and to this home. But at least once a day, I get anxious about how we may be failing to prepare them for their future. So there's nothing clear cut about it, but I will say I like them so much, and if something in this last 18 years has been what's created a space for them to kind of step fully into who they are, and I'm thrilled we made it a priority.
That's beautiful. I think it's interesting when you say that you like them so much. Somehow that conveyed even more emotion, or there's a way of honoring the relationship beyond just saying I love them so much. I think is a common phrase that parents would use, right, to describe the relationship with their children, but something about liking your children. I don't know, takes it to a whole different level. Michele, I'm curious about, I'm sorry, say?
Oh, I was just saying that's such a good observation because I think the like part is not such a given.
No. Especially when it comes to the Insta families, right? Anything, your family of origin, the person, yeah, the people that you bring into the world, all of it. Love is implied, like is optional. That's a choice. I'm curious about this, this idea, this notion of having a space for grief and joy, and how to manage those, because I imagine, well, you have teenage girls, so I can imagine that the two sides of that coin show up on a regular basis, likely, as it does for many. I'm curious about what's your interaction with those two emotions? What's the experience for you when you're dealing with either clients in the past or even in people in your own life that are experiencing either of those two?
Oh, yeah. So for me, grief and joy are so intertwined. And I had some early losses that were really traumatic. My dad died when I was 16, and my 24-year-old sister died a month before my 21st birthday. And then I lost my 33-year-old brother when I was 35. And all three of those were sudden. And, tremendous grief that persists to this day. Like, it's not something you check off. But I remember early on, as I processed the grief of those experiences, beginning to see the correlation between how deeply you're willing to experience grief and how much joy is available to you. And so as I created space for the grief, then I noticed that I just had these bursts of joy that were grounded in gratitude and just an appreciation for these sometimes really little things that felt super joyful. Now, I will say though, Valerie, like I haven't experienced that to be like a totally clear, hey, great, you do grief well, so now you get more joy. Like, it doesn't feel like that to me. I think that happens, and then just as often I find myself closed off and protecting myself and not accessing the joy that's available to me for fear that the happier I am, the harder it'll be should and when grief strikes again. So I think it's complex but interconnected.
So let's talk a little bit about how grief manifests itself for you. So I think that may have something to do with how joy manifests for other people, right? So when you say grief, and clearly you shared some of the traumatic experiences and losing so many family members so suddenly, but describe for us, what does grief look like for you?
Mm-hmm. It's funny because my dad died when I was in high school, my sister when I was in college, and then my brother when I was married with 2 kids. And so developmentally, those are really different experiences. And having gone through the first and second one, the third one was really different. And so, for me, the first one was just such a, like everything that I thought I knew was ripped out from under me when my dad died. And so I remember thinking, this is an experience of loneliness that I had no concept of. And I think that's because grief work is so personal, and there's a piece of it that you can only do alone, and then there's a piece of it that in the absence of community it doesn't happen. So But I remember even as a 16-year-old going, this is a different kind of lonely. Like I don't have a frame for this. And just feeling, and I remember when my sister died, going back to college that first week, and how impossible it was to be dropped off by my mom and brother, and just feeling so vulnerable and so just
Like you froze there a little, Michele.
Am I back? Am I back? Valerie, am I back? Can you find me? Valerie, did that help?
Hi, Michele.
Are we back?
Well, part of us is back. Somehow my computer has not quite come back yet. So I'm on my telephone now. This is wonderful, though. Any moment now, I'm sure it'll come back. But I did want to apologize for the glitch. You were saying something really profound about having experienced grief and the loneliness that came from having lost your father. So I'd love to get back to that if you've not lost your flow yet.
Well, first of all, I'm so glad to see you back, because when you dropped off, Zoom said, you're the host now. And I was like, I'm not sure what to do with this, but I'm just going to wait. I'm just going to wait for Valerie. So I just sat there. So welcome back. Are you there?
Yes, I am here.
So did you lose me then when we were talking about the lonely part?
Yes.
Yeah, that was sort of like one of the kind of, oh wow, this is something I've not yet had to access, and then the vulnerability and the numbness that came when my sister died, and I was going back to school, and I remember just being like on campus and surrounded by all these people who, you know, presumably we're not going through that. Now I know better. Everyone's going through stuff all the time, but I just remember feeling so vulnerable, and how hard it was when my mom and brother had to go and left me at college. And the way that I dealt with that was I ran. Like, that was the time that I could sort of breathe, as if I was running. And so for that first semester, I ran 8 miles a day, because that was literally my oxygen. And the other thing I did was bought a bike. And when I was on my bike, I felt better. And my friend Sarah loaned me $250 to buy the bike, and I would make payments to her, which was such a gracious way to show up for someone in grief. Because that made a big difference. And then when my brother died, you know, in some ways that marked a chief devastation for me. He was my younger brother. My brother and sister were a little older and a little younger than me, so they sandwiched me. And I feel like when he died, I sort of lost my the fullness of my tribe and our family in terms of cohort. And he was also my memory, because he remembered everything and I didn't remember really anything. And so, he was the person you could pick up the phone and go, what was that episode of whatever, or what happened when that teacher did such and such, and he would have the whole story. So another shocking loss, but my experience of it was so different and so spiritual. And I think it was because I had been through it already twice, and I knew that I was going to be awake during that period of grief to what really mattered in a way that would eventually fade. And so I had just worked really hard to drop deeply into that space. And it felt sacred to me. It felt devastating. I still feel devastated by it, but it also felt like a real invitation to clarity and the sacred that only comes in grief.
I haven't had the level of grief that you describe. I've, been fortunate so far at this point in my life to have all of my closest family members still here. And I'm curious about, what is it about experiencing life this way, where you're embracing, where you're reaching towards the devastation that you experienced in the loss of your family members? What was it about you or your life or how you grew up that made that important?
I'm not really sure what made it important, but I do remember early on not wanting to be defined by my losses and wanting to be broken open, not just broken. Like, I wanted it to create a richer, more textured space for me that wouldn't be available to me in the absence of those experiences. It was like I didn't want to squander. So there was a piece of loyalty toward them and the loss of them, and wanting that to count for something, for it to be paid forward, for me to, experience all of these little things that now, I don't know how many years ago. So my brother died when he was 33, 46 right now, 45. So, that's 12 years of experiences that I've had that he didn't have, even longer for my sister and dad. And so, I don't know, like, a really simple example is like when people complain about aging, I just get the biggest internal eye roll, because I'm like, the alternative sucks. And so, like, for me, I'm so happy to get to see a sunrise and a sunset, and see a squirrel chase, and a kid laughing, all those little things that happen in a day. I think there's some recording in my head of like, you get this, and they don't get it right now. Who knows what they're doing, but they don't get this. And so don't miss it, and don't take it for granted.
And I'm curious about where that comes from. I can imagine, and you said something that I thought was really interesting, is that there's some grief that you experience and you have to go through aspects of it alone. And there's some that can only be processed in community. So when and how do you gauge what needs to be processed alone and what should be processed in community?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that to me is one of the darker sides of the grief I've experienced, which is that, I hold my cards pretty close to my chest, and I probably underutilize community. So I don't know that I'm equipped to even speak to that. But I can point to moments where I did take risks and allowed friendships to create healing spaces for me that I knew at my bone marrow level, in the absence of those, I could not have healed those pieces of myself. It was work that I couldn't just do alone.
Can you give an example?
Yeah. I'm thinking of my friend Sarah, who helped me buy the bike. So she and my friends, oh my God, I'm having like a brain, Beth and David. Okay. I was thinking about my friend Amy and I almost flipped the two. So it was Sarah, Beth, and David, and they helped me go on a trip to do some hiking in Colorado. And the hiking of the mountain was so symbolic. It was something I needed to physically do in order to move through pieces of what I was dealing with. And they created the space for that, and they created this wonderful container where we just laughed our heads off and did silly things. And I won't go into the silly things that we did on this, but I'll tell you later.
Okay.
But it was this invitation to sort of release some things and almost like invite adrenaline into my life in a way that restarted my heart.
Invite adrenaline.
Yeah.
What do you mean by invite adrenaline?
Like to do some things, like physical challenges that that literally filled me with adrenaline, which created like a mental emotional shift for me at the same time. Uh-oh, did I lose you again? Are you there, Valerie? I might be the frozen one.
I'll have you know, Michele, that this is the 45th episode of Time to Come Alive, and it maybe happened one time. So you have brought the level of energy that you've brought to the particular program today is such that not even the internet can stand it.
Interpretation. I think I might interpret it the other way around.
No, it's actually quite phenomenal. So I apologize, and I appreciate so much your just willingness to go with it. I just feel like, you know what, I think it's actually indicative of the level and the depth of conversation needs a little bit of a pause sometimes for people to internalize everything that you've shared. So,
you're like good. That's good.
what do you do with it? So you were sharing about the adrenaline, and I wanted to go back to that. I don't know if I got my question out before the internet broke down on me, but you were talking about how you needed to express it, like use this adrenaline, like you engaged with your friends in such a way that you got something from it or for it. So I'm curious about what that was.
Yeah, I think it was like engaging in physical challenges that filled me with adrenaline on a physical level that also kind of jump-started my heart emotionally and spiritually, kind of pulled me up and out of just the numbness factor.
This is a terrible analogy, but I remember one of my favorite James Bond movies is Casino Royale. And the one where he's given some drug and his heart stops and he has to like give himself, he has to use the paddles on himself to revive himself. And it's just, that's the image that I have, is that you're literally reviving yourself by doing something that keeps your adrenaline. And I think there's another movie actually where the person had to keep a certain level of adrenaline coursing through their body or they would die. I'm not sure.
Yeah. No, I think that's the only shift I would make to that interpretation is I didn't do it. I didn't know I needed it. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to access it. But my 3 friends did.
Wow.
That space for me.
That's beautiful. Because I can imagine, you mentioned that before we even started this conversation about the importance of dispelling loneliness. I think there's a place and time clearly where being alone is essential for us as a species, right? We need that time either to reflect or to relax or to re-engage with ourselves. And I think what you're also pointing to is this idea of our community sometimes knows what we need. We don't necessarily need to know all the answers, right? When we surround ourselves with the right people and allow ourselves to open up to them and what they might have to offer, they might guide us in ways that are completely unexpected, but very needed. And this notion of dispelling the loneliness that accompanies some of those very deep emotions, whether they be joy or pain, I think has a lot to do with the community with whom we rely, the people we rely on to bring us out of that.
Yes. And the way in which they stepped into that, not awaiting invitation, which I think is something a lot of us do, and I include myself, when someone we know is hurting, they let me know what you need, or what can I do for you? And sometimes that's a beautiful way to kind of open space, but not fill it with your own assumptions. And other times, that person in that moment can't access a plan that will help them. And so just moving in and taking action is what I needed. I needed my friends to recognize what might help me and make it so.
Yes. So it sounds like just being attentive, like just being in the world of the person is enough to at least guide us in knowing when we should offer, when we should pull the person away and to do something, or perhaps just to be the person that they feel completely open and asking, hey, can you do this for me? Or can you be with me? Or can you share this with me? I want to switch gears a little bit because, one thing that I've learned about you in the short times that we've had opportunities to have these conversations is that you also hold a really big space and a high regard for joy. And it happens to be one of my favorite words. And you can't see it from here, but there's a little frame on the mantle there by my fireplace that has the word joy in Hindi, because I got it at there was a table setting at a wedding that I felt just resonant. It was for me. It was made for me. But thanks, Abhijit and Lindsay, for your tabletop. And I'm curious about what the significance of joy is for you. It clearly has significance for me, but I wanted to hear from you what it meant and how you experience it.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of joy and of marshaling our energy and knowing that we're contagious. And so that if we are not creating space for joy and play and positive energy, then the people around us are impacted by that. So at a minimum, they're impacted by a missed opportunity on our part. And so I've always taken that very seriously, that if I'm around people and I tilt the energy down, then that's on me. If I'm around people and it sort of stays neutral because I'm just in a pretty neutral state, that's fine, but what a missed opportunity. And so I've gotten like super interested lately in the idea that there's what we know and what we can do, and then there's how we impact people just by presence and energy. And I relied a whole lot of my life on what I know and what I can do, and was pretty achievement oriented. And now I'm paying more attention to this inside out journey for myself and for other leaders that I work with, and how the biggest gift that I can give anyone around me is to regulate my own nervous system and access joy. And then that creates space for people around you to do the same.
Regulating my own nervous system. I think that should be on a t-shirt. Really, it may already be on one, but regulate my own nervous system. And there's a book, oh my goodness, I can't remember her name right now. She wrote, Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. Are you familiar with her? Yeah, Stroke of Insight. I remember seeing her in an interview where she talked about the moment that she lost the function of the left side of her brain, which was a lot of the logic-driven function. She was able to notice energies, especially when she was in the process of receiving all sorts of treatments and interventions. And she had the notion to let people know that they have to be responsible for the energy they brought into the room when they interacted with her, because she was so sensitive to all that. So that's what it reminded me of when you said that we have a responsibility to the energy that we bring to our interactions with people. Oh, that's really rich. So what would that look like though? I mean, you're with people on a regular basis. You connect with people. Oh, are we losing?
I'm here.
My internet connection is unstable again. Michelle, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Oh no. Are you back?
All right, can you hear me? Hello?
I can hear you.
Can you see me?
I can't see you.
Okay. What in the world?
We're 3 for 3.
This is really, really insane. That's not, it's not common. Let's see here. Let's see what's happening. How about now? Can you see me now?
Yes, I can see you.
Oh dear. Yes, but this is part of the process too. I really, I know this conversation is so important that there's nothing that's going to stop me from getting through every single thing that we wanted to talk about. So, woosah, reset. So getting back to talking about the idea of being responsible for one's own energy. And yes, having the t-shirt that says, I think the regulate, right? Regulate your own, what was it?
Your own nervous system.
Your nervous system. Yes, regulate your own nervous system. So wanting to get back into what we talked about before, and I just can't remember. It was something so brilliant that I wanted to say. And I'm like, did I already say that? I think I already said that.
And then say
I remember you asked me this really cool question. I think one of the reasons that I so appreciated our conversation is, although I came in and shared with you very openly that I was kind of a sad place most of the day I'd been in that space, you asked me, I think the question that really shifted it for me was when you asked why I chose the name Connect to Joy for my company name, and why the word joy out of all the words that I could have chosen, and just really reconnecting with the why behind it, which for me was simply that I feel like joy is something that comes from the inside out. It's not contrived or manufactured. It's something that we have to cultivate and nurture, and that everyone should, kind of like you said, regulate your own nervous system, or everyone should regulate their own joy is part of that. And I also remember, have you ever heard of Laurel Melon in the book Wired for Joy? Wired for Joy. I remember years and years ago, I was working with a therapist, and one of the things that we discussed was this idea of all of us having a set point for joy. And in the book, Laurel Melon describes that there's like these 5 different brain states that we can go through, and the set point that we have at any given moment is kind of like a natural, just where our go-to is, but that needs to be cultivated. So anyway, ever since then, I just really felt responsible for my own joy, and I've really committed to surrounding myself with the people, with the activities, with the calendar, with everything I could that would help cultivate and nurture it. So that's really my why. I'm curious about why that particular word has such meaning for you.
Yeah.
You even have it on your mug. Did you show your mug? I think you should show your mug.
But yeah, my mug. Now I picked this special for you today, but yeah.
Yes, honored.
I
mean, if it were an interview, it would really hit the mark, but.
Right? I love that it faces you. You know how some mugs, like the message is here, but this mug, the message faces the person drinking it, which I think is kind of awesome.
Unless you're left-handed.
Oh, unless you're, I just totally, poor left-handers.
They have no joy. I'm kidding.
Okay, great question. I think I'm not sure when joy is my motivator and when joy is just a natural output of doing the work around regulating the nervous system. I think it's some of both, but I spend a fair amount of time thinking about my and the people I work with's relationship to stress, fear, and ego, and how those forces hijack us into kind of a smaller version of ourselves, and that if we can have a healthy relationship with those forces, then we step into situations calm and with greater ease in accessing joy. So I'm not sure. I really want to think about your question, but that's what comes up for me straight out of the gate.
Well, let's talk about those 3, because I don't know if I've ever heard them quite described that way. Stress, fear, and ego hijacking us to a smaller version of ourselves. What exactly, give an example of that so that we can ground the people who are listening in something more tangible.
Yeah. So for me, like, stress is kind of obvious, right? Fear is when, well, like, if I do something because I'm worried about something, like, I'll use an example with my daughter, Maya, who's 17, but she's a senior in high school. And when I'm grounded in love, I interact a certain way with her. When I get hooked by fear, which would be something like a narrative like, she's not going to be able to live alone. She's not ready. This is clearly like going to end in disaster. All those tapes that go off in your head when you have months to prepare your kid for a launch. Then I constrict and I get narrow and I get more frustrated and I close space. Same with ego, like little ego, like when things in my head are like, if only, or why don't they, things that pull me into a space of being problem focused, feeling like a victim. Again, it's little v victim, just that pull me into a smaller space. Now, what I've learned is you can't like wrestle with stress, fear, and anger. You've got to understand that they're showing up probably in an effort to protect you, but they're out of balance with what you actually need. And so I've learned to, instead of like banish them or try to wrestle them or try to outsmart them, I've learned to recognize that they're there, get curious about them, in some cases even thank them for showing up in a desire to protect me. And the metaphor I use is, they're gonna be around, but are they driving? When they're driving, I do not show up in the world in a healthy way. And I can give you examples from yesterday, the day before, maybe every day before that. But when I can escort them to the sidecar and understand that stress, fear, and ego are always going to be there, but they don't have to be in charge. So when I can notice they're there and escort them to the sidecar, then I'm in that neurological place where I can access deep joy that comes from a really authentic place that isn't manufactured and isn't about anxiety. It's just about presence and awareness and being where I am.
That is interesting to think of also in terms of another person, right? We all clearly experience stress, fear, and our little ego wants to take over, and I love the idea of being able to honor their existence by understanding that they're these protective measures that we take that just automatically like shields up, right? They're activated somehow. And I wonder, as you said that, I was also thinking when I interact with others that might have their shields up, that there's something that I may be doing or not doing that is triggering their need to self-protect.
Yeah, that's so lovely, right?
And yeah, and I think about, my role as a coach oftentimes, or even as a host of this program is to engage in some profound conversation and sometimes some very vulnerable areas. So how do I create the kind of space where someone's fear, stress, ego doesn't show up in a way to disarm or to drive the conversation? How to create enough safety? So I can see both sides, right? Us being responsible for regulating our own nervous system so that those three emotions or those three ways of being don't drive us. And also as a community member responsible for creating the kind of safety in the team, in the family, in the the networking event or whatever, the grocery store, where someone doesn't feel like they have to protect themselves that way around me either.
Oh, I love it. It's such a different way of being in the world than kind of triggering the narratives that we have about other people when they are captured by stress, fear, or ego. Usually our narratives push them further into that space. But the way you're talking about it feels so nice, just to see them as we see ourselves, hopefully with gentle eyes, sort of that generosity of spirit, and see what our role in that. Like, is there something I can do that would create safety so that we can have a different kind of conversation.
Well, I think this is something that you're naturally gifted at, Michele. From my experience with you, is that creating that safety. And I'm curious about what you would offer to someone that wants to be that safe space. You know, clearly you have been trained as a family therapist, so that might have something to do with it. But I'm also curious, you show up like this in your day-to-day life, I imagine, at least in my experience you have. What would you offer those that might want to find ways to create that safety for others?
Yeah, it goes back to that key piece of advice that I tell people all the time. Like, truly, if there's one thing you can do, and only one thing that is going to impact the people around you the most, it's regulate your own nervous system. And so it looks different for different people, but breathing, some sort of meditation practice, for me, it's those two things. It's running, it's yoga, it's making sure I'm reading things that inspire me. Those are practices that keep me, for the most part, like I said, I can give you examples of moments most every day where I flip out of that centered space and do something, that I'm embarrassed about. But here's the difference. Years ago, I was doing those things and I had no awareness of it. Then I maybe got aware of it, but I rationalized it. Then I started to try to work on it, but I couldn't notice it until after it passed. Then I started noticing it while it was happening. Then I got the capacity to stop it while it was happening. Now I can tell, not always, but a lot of the time, when it's building, and I can intervene and I can drop back into sort of a centered place. And then when I show up as a ball of energy, like we all are, centered like that, with the intention of having an authentic, genuine exchange with the person who's next to me, and acknowledging the sacred gift that it is to be able to do that, and looking for the net. Like, I'm a big believer that things tend to link, and if you're awake to it, you can notice like little shimmering moments that happen between people or just around you. And if you follow those moments, that life tends to conspire in your favor. So, I'm looking for those when I'm talking to people. And I think in so many ways, it all goes back to, I get to do this, and my brother Marshall and my sister Lisa and my dad don't. And I'm forever aware of the privilege of really every breath.
Wow. I mean, what can be topped by that? To have developed the privilege of every breath. I mean, we all have it, clearly, if we're here listening, speaking, interacting. And I can see also that for those people that are fortunate enough to be that shimmering, where you pick up that shimmering experience, or that opportunity to honor that shimmer, or to pull it out, or to bring it front and center, that it would have such a profound impact on the quality of interaction that we have with each other, right? I think that that's an area where we can all take even more responsibility for, right? Regulating ourselves, but also Marianne Williamson says this a lot in some of her spiritual talks, is that being centered, meditating, doing a mindful practice in our lives, having mindful practice in our life, is a way for us to shape up our attitudinal muscles, she says. And just like we would want to go running or lift weights or do yoga to help shore up our physical muscles, to keep us upright and keep us moving, and our bodies flowing, those attitudinal muscles of stillness and meditation help us center ourselves. So like you said, as you described each of those, the evolution of your mindful state, right, that we have the experience of just being that much more aware, that much more able to interact with or to not get hijacked by some of the emotions that can sometimes derail us. So really, really brilliant. Was anything else that you'd like to share as we are wrapping up?
Just that I hope that for myself and for everyone that isn't used as like one more reason to have shame spirals, so like, for example, like I said, the last 2 days I had 2 uncharacteristic moments where my reaction outsized what was happening and I made things worse, not better. And that's unusual for me at this point because I work really hard at it. And so instead of allowing that to put me into a shame spiral, I'm trying to interact with that from a posture of curiosity and just going, something is coming out sideways because you're not creating the space for it to come out directly. And I don't know what that is yet, but I know there's something going on for me that I need to better understand, and that those 2 moments were clues for me instead of seeing them as failures, although I would love do-overs in both cases.
And one thing sorry?
If you're listening, I'm sorry.
And I think that's the part of the grace that we have to have with ourselves and with each other when things don't go well. I think part of it, just like when we break a precious piece of china or some glass, that we lament the having broken something, especially if it had any high value, whether monetary or emotional value. And we have such a delightful opportunity that we can actually clean it up. So we can clean it up with the people in our lives where that reaction wasn't appropriate, or where we start to realize, that's not really what I was upset about. That was some free-floating resentment that happened to spill out on you. I like that phrase, free-floating resentment, which I totally stole from Michele Kinder here. So, and from whoever you got it from. But it's, I think it's just having the grace for ourselves to being able to say, you know what, I messed up. That wasn't what I intended, or in the moment I wasn't as clear. My attitudinal muscles were really weak. And then we do better when we know better. Yeah. Oh my goodness, Michele, this has been, with the exception of a few dropped moments in the conversation, but I think again, it's such a testament to who you are as a human being, and just your adaptability. And we didn't even get to like your history. So this is definitely not the only time that I would love for you to be a guest on this program. I think there's so much that you shared that has left us going, I wonder.
For being you and the way that you show up in the world in such embodied joy and grace.
Thank you very much. I take that. First of all, I think that's wonderful high praise. And I think that's a responsibility that all of us have some way, to embrace some aspect of our being that we want to have out in the world. So it's a gift of self, the gift of our human spirit. We get to package whichever parts of it we think is the most relevant and the most impactful, and share that with others. So I appreciate you doing that with me today, and just being so open and fun-loving and deep. And I know that you keep things close to the vest, so the fact that you shared what you shared, as much as you shared on such a public forum, I do not take for granted. And your wish was that something that was shared or something that was discussed have an impact on others, and it's had an impact on me. So thank you.
Thank you, Mallory. Hopefully I'll see you soon.
Absolutely. So those of you who've been listening, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm sure that if you have questions for Michele, she's probably opened up some curiosity for you already. Michele, is there a place where people can get a hold of you if they want to listen, or maybe join one of your talks or read something that you've written?
Yeah, probably the easiest is michelekinder.com. And
michelekinder.com.
Momentous Institute, learning more about their amazing work, it's momentusinstitute.org.
Fantastic. And I'll be sure to put both of those websites in the show notes, so that way people have access afterwards. Great. Thank you again, Michele, so much for your generosity of spirit. Next week, everyone, on Time to Come Alive, we'll be talking to Keisha Ricks, one of my favorite people. She is a mompreneur and all the things that she does to master both the art of abundance in her business, but also with her family at home. So looking forward to that conversation and how she finds time and a way to come alive in those areas of life that matter to her. Thank you all so much for tuning in and sharing yourselves and sharing this with people in your lives. Have a wonderful rest of the day, everybody. Bye.